a toll on our way of life and have touched nearly everyone in my district. We must ensure we retain the vital funding to the Corps of Engineers so that we can repair and reinforce our levees so that citizens in the lower Mississippi Valley and the Mid-South can live in safety and our economy can recover. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio rise?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. You know, this has been an interesting debate. I've been able to sit down here and listen to a lot of folks on both sides talk about really investments that we need to make in the United States. And I'm glad that there are some investments that our friends on the other side actually think are important to the country, because it seems in many ways the national narrative is that there isn't anything the government can make investments in that is important for our country. And to hear some members talk about natural disasters and to hear some members talk about the barges going up and down and farmland, there's a huge subsidy program where billions of federal dollars are spent to support farmers. There are obviously dams that need built, and that is federal money. And when it applies to certain members' districts where they're actually affected and families affected, it's their responsibility to come to Washington, D.C. and advocate for those investments. And I think what you're seeing here on our side is that we have members on this side of the aisle who believe that investments need to be made in our communities too, and that over 30 years, if you take cities like Youngstown or Cleveland or Detroit, you will see cities that need investment. And we may not have had a natural disaster, but over the last 30 years we have had an economic disaster where we have had a lack of private investment. And I'm rising here to say that high-speed rail can be a force multiplier in our economic improvement in our community and across the country. And the gentleman from California just cited the number of jobs, the billions of dollars that could be invested. And in Youngstown, Ohio, we would be linked up to a Pittsburgh to Cleveland corridor that would then go over to Toledo and Detroit, that would make its way over to Chicago. This is essentially connecting the United States of America. But you take an economic region like ours with two major powerhouses in education and in health care that would be connected by high-speed rail. And in Ohio, we gave away the high-speed rail money too. Our governor gave it away. And there were hundreds of millions of dollars in private investment that was going to follow the public investment that needs to be made. But if we're going to connect, if we're going to try to resuscitate some of these older areas in our country, high-speed rail is a way to do it. These are investments that can be made. We can connect the Cleveland Clinic with the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. We can connect Case Western Reserve with Carnegie Mellon, and they can partner in research, get on the train, and help lead some economic development and commercialization of products. You could take a region of our country and connect it through high-speed rail. And so the problem is, and I will end with this, all of these investments need to be made. This is the dirty little secret in Washington, D.C. We're only spending 2% of our GDP on our infrastructure. And while China and India are spending 10% of their GDP reinvesting back into their country. And we will lose the future if we do not make these investments. These are critical to the competitiveness of the United States. Both the dams that need to be built and the high-speed rail and the roads and the combined sewer and the airports and the ports and the highways and the bridges. We need to invest in all of these things. Our country is crumbling. And we can't have members say, we only need to make this one investment for this one dam because it's in my district and because I know families who have been hurt. We've got to elevate ourselves and look what needs to be done in the entirety of the whole country. And how are we going to compete against China? How are we going to compete against India? how are we going to be globally competitive? All of these investments need to be made, including the economic development and the private investment that can be drawn in through high-speed rail. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas rise?
To strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman, and I really do want to thank our appropriators. This is a tough, tough business. I will certainly want to thank the ranking member who I had the privilege of working with, and thank the chairman as well, because this is a tough dilemma that we are facing. I think I come with a very unique perspective. I live in hurricane and flood country. Houston is the site and was a recipient of hundreds of thousands of Katrina survivors coming in from New Orleans. We have faced our own ups and downs, most recently with Hurricane Ike. And I walked the beach with both former President Clinton and former President Bush when we went down to Galveston and looked at the amazing devastation. So many of us were concerned about the tragedy in Joplin, Missouri and other places, and then the constant flooding. I have talked to members of Congress who there's flooding going on in their district as we speak. But here is the dilemma that we have, and the reason why I rise to raise the question of the recapturing of already designated funds, and to realize that these are not funds that were just sitting in a pile unused. These funds are not only already designated, I'd like to say appropriated, high-speed rail dollars, but as well, these funds will generate thousands of jobs. And as I read the amounts of monies that were designated, $450 million were going to be utilized for necessary repairs in New Jersey. That means that my friends on the floor of the House have made a sacrifice, and I appreciate that. But high-speed rail is a valuable and necessary investment in America's future. I truly believe that there could have been a compromise where resources could have been used for the flooding problems in the area that my colleagues have spoken about, the needy areas, and still leave an amount that would have been shared for high-speed rail. Let's create jobs together. That is the restoration of those flood areas. I would almost ask the question without knowing, as a member of the Authorizing Committee for Homeland Security, what other opportunities might have been in place to be able to utilize those dollars for the disaster that has occurred. But I will tell you, it is no doubt, as you go across Europe and see the value of high-speed rail, new technology, that America is far behind with its high-speed rail investment, the new technology, the new science, the new kinds of cars that are being produced that will create jobs, the, in essence, putting the cars together, manufacturing the cars, but then the assembling of the cars now being placed in cities around America. Those are real jobs, long-term jobs. And so the decision that the administration made was a thoughtful decision. Let me thank Secretary LaHood for understanding the value of high-speed rail, and I would suggest that the proposal that we have for Texas does impact rural Texas. It is a proposal for high-speed rail from Houston to Dallas, going through our rural communities, creating the opportunities for jobs, but creating the opportunities for investment in the purchase of land, the growth of business. All of that has an impact in creating jobs. That's what we're all here for. We're here to be the rainy day umbrella for Americans who are in trouble, and as well we're here to create jobs which Americans are so desperately in need of. So I'm disappointed that we didn't find the happy balance, and I believe that we couldn't measure the amount of resources that might have been able to be utilized for our friends that have just experienced a disaster, and not completely gut monies that are already designated, appropriated. It's almost as if we came in and said there's a pile of cash and I'm not going to bother to identify what it's supposed to be used for. And I would hope that there would be a method of reconsideration. These are fair gentlemen on the floor of the House. I've worked with all of my colleagues here, and I would just raise the question of why would we, in essence, zero out high-speed rail, not only for our urban centers, but for our Midwestern areas that are desperately in need of jobs, and for the southern areas that now are looking to the future for high-speed rail to create jobs and create the quality, excellent, superior mobility system that Americans deserve. Not the country of America, but the people of America deserve. I would argue vigorously for a reconsideration of the funding and the restructuring of the funding to ensure that we have high-speed rail, create jobs, and deal with our friends who are in need. With that, I yield back my time.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise? Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm urging this House to spend the high-speed rail money on what it's designated for, high-speed rail projects. Much of this money, or a good portion of it, was turned down by governors of other states. So I'm here as a representative of Michigan's 13th district. I want to go on the record right now of claiming that money because Michigan and Metro Detroit, the district that I represent, we need jobs. Jobs that will be created by the high-speed rail project. Jobs that will be created when that high-speed rail that links Detroit to Chicago is tied into a regional transit system around Metro Detroit. That's going to attract businesses all around that system. Companies and employers are more likely to stay in Detroit, move to Detroit, when they realize they can have close access to Chicago and other Midwestern areas. But jobs not only as an indirect result of this transit system and high-speed rail system, but by manufacturing the rails and the passenger cars that are going to be used. By creating jobs, that is the most effective way to create a long-term, resilient, enduring economy. And that's the best way to pay down our debt. I understand the point that we should allocate a funding source to provide funding to the flood victims. Well, I'd like to propose one. Over the last 10 years, this Congress has authorized the spending of over $50 billion, $50 billion, that's with a B, in economic aid to Afghanistan. Each fiscal year, including this current one, we're spending at least $4 billion on economic aid in Afghanistan. I'm proposing let's just take a share of the money we're sending overseas to help serve and protect people in another country. Let's redirect American tax dollars back to serve Americans. And that's my fundamental point, is this. We need to be more conservative with our tax dollars. Yes, there's needs all around the world, but our people need help right here. This budget choice that we're faced with right now underscores that. This is a choice that we should not have to make. We shouldn't have to choose between serving flood victims and providing the long-term jobs that we need in Michigan and Metro Detroit through high-speed rail. You know, there's another fairness issue. Folks, where I live, the auto capital of the world, they can't afford an automobile because of the high cost of automobile insurance. They need high-speed rail and the synergy it will create with mass transit. So again, I urge you, let's use this money for its intended purpose, to ultimately create jobs. That's the best way that we can pay down the federal debt, and also it's the principle of it. In these tough economic times, let's redirect American tax dollars to serve Americans. High-speed rail in America will create jobs and make a difference for our people, a positive difference. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in the congressional record on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order: an amendment by Mr. Matheson of Utah, an amendment by Mr. Reed of New York, amendment number 65 by Mr. Holt of New Jersey, amendment number 68 by Mr. Royce of California, amendment number 43 by Mr. Brown of Georgia, an amendment by Mr. Schiff of California, amendment number 48 by Mr. Brown of Georgia, an amendment by Mr. Shimkus of Illinois, an amendment number 47 by Mr. Brown of Georgia. The Chair will reduce to 2 minutes the time of any electronic vote after the first vote in this series. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment offered by the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Matheson, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Mr. Matheson of Utah.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
A fourth day in the U.S. House with consideration of the 2012 Energy and Water Spending Bill. 9 amendment votes. These are amendments that were considered yesterday. They're getting a vote now. The first one, 15 minutes. All of the following 8 amendment votes will be 2-minute votes. This is an amendment proposed by Jim Matheson of Utah, which increase in funding for a non-defense environmental cleanup by $10 million against a 15-minute vote. Well, ahead of another meeting at the White House this afternoon on the debt and deficit, both the Democratic and Republican leadership in the House held news conferences this afternoon. Both of them addressed the possibility of a meeting this weekend at Camp David. We're going to start off first with a briefing that just finished up in the Capitol. John Boehner and the Majority Leader Eric Cantor.
Did you get here about an hour ago? I've told the President that his debt limit increase can only pass the House if it includes spending cuts that are larger than the increase in the debt limit, that there are no tax increases attached to this, and that serious reforms have to be enacted to restrict future spending. And I can't think of anything that would do more to ensure such spending restraints are set in stone than implementing a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. The amendment we vote on next week, frankly, it's just common sense. It says the government can only spend what it takes in and places real limits on the ability of politicians to increase taxes or to increase spending. But this common sense measure can only become a reality if enough of our Democrat colleagues join us in voting for it and sending it to the states. The American people are still asking the question, where are the jobs? The Democrats said that the stimulus spending bill that they all voted for would keep unemployment below 8%. Unemployment today is at 9.2%. And after 3 years of trillion-dollar deficits and the ongoing threat of tax hikes, job creators continue to be frozen with uncertainty. So we need to stop the Washington spending binge and help create a better environment for long-term job growth. A balanced budget amendment will help us do that. A balanced budget amendment will help ensure that the cuts that we make today are locked in for the future. And a balanced budget amendment will also give private sector job creators real certainty about what the future fiscal picture looks like from here in Washington. I've long been a supporter of the balanced budget amendment, and I hope the President and Democrat leaders will join us in making sure that we can pass this and send it to the states.
Central to the discussions that we've been having on the debt ceiling increase is how are we going to ensure that we're actually changing the system in Washington, that we're actually going to change the way that we spend taxpayer dollars. We are also very concerned about making sure we can go home to the people that we represent and tell them that it has changed, that we are going to stop spending money we don't have, and we're going to live just like the people of this country live in their homes, in their personal lives, and their businesses. The Balanced Budget Amendment does just that. It accomplishes what we want, which is to change the system, finally begin to get the fiscal house in order, so as the Speaker said, we can return to what the priority of this country is to get the economy growing again and get people back to work.
16 years ago, we were faced with the same question. We came one vote shy, and now we're here today having a discussion. Well, before I came, I turned on CNBC. Gold's up, Dow's down. Had that one vote been different, we wouldn't be having this press conference. I want you to only imagine, had that one vote been different, what would we be talking about this press conference? It wouldn't be the jobless report that we've seen time and time again. Now is the time to restore the confidence. Now is the time to correct the mistake. If there's ever a window of opportunity, we welcome everybody to join with us. Now, it's not something the Democrats have not talked about. There's many Democrats that offered balanced budget amendments. Sidney Hoyer even said as of March of last year, he welcomed the Blue Dog doing a balanced budget amendment as well. And we welcome everybody to join with us. But think for one moment. 16 years ago, we wouldn't be going through this mess had we given this Congress some adult supervision. This is the opportunity to give the confidence back to this country and move us forward that we can get past our discussions today.
In his farewell address, President Reagan said that there were two things he wished he would have accomplished: a line item veto and a balanced budget amendment. And as was mentioned, in 1997, the House passed the balanced budget amendment, and it came one vote short in the Senate. And one of the senators who voted for it, Joe Biden. When I was first running for Congress in 2004, I talked about the importance of a balanced budget amendment. After I was elected, I believe I had underestimated to what degree it was going to be difficult to change the culture here that was centered on spending, borrowing, and printing money. A balanced budget amendment will force Congress to live within its means, force Congress to start setting priorities. I believe that this is so important in changing the course that we are currently on. It's important to ensuring that we pass on the American dream to the next generation.
Our president is currently presiding over the worst economy since the Great Depression. He is presiding over the greatest debt challenge since the dawn of the Republic. These are not ordinary times. These are extraordinary times, and they demand an extraordinary remedy. The president wants us to help pay for his spending binge. Since we started this debate, our message to the president has been simple. Mr. President, if you want our help to pay your bills, it is time to cut up the credit cards. The debate over the balanced budget dates back to the dawn of the Republic. Jefferson lamented that it was not part of our Constitution. But we are on the verge of being the first generation in America's history to leave the next generation with a lower standard of living. Winston Churchill once said that Americans can usually be counted on to do the right thing once they've exhausted every other possibility. It's a humorous line for times that are not humorous. We've spent decades exhausting the other possibilities. The American family has to balance their budget. Companies that are trying to create jobs have to balance their budget. Why would we expect that a great nation could continue on indefinitely without balancing theirs? It is time for a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America.
So 16 years ago, we came this close to passing a balanced budget amendment, and now don't you get the sense that we are approaching a national crescendo? The American people are looking at Washington, D.C., and they are begging for leadership that is clear and forthright and fixes this problem once and for all. We've seen what President Obama is able to do in the past by turning on the high beams and getting members of his party to vote for very controversial pieces of legislation along the lines of the controversial health care law. What we need is President Obama to take a leadership role to engage members of his party in the House of Representatives to pass this balanced budget amendment language. Republicans alone can't do it. It's going to take 50-plus Democrats in order to get this done. And we call on President Obama to balance this budget.
I'm Congressman Bob Goodlatte from Virginia. I want to thank Speaker Boehner, Leader Cantor, and the rest of our leadership team for moving forward on a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. House Joint Resolution 1, which I introduced on the first day of this Congress, which has very strong support, one of two that I have introduced. It's not my idea. It's not a new idea. In fact, in 1798, 9 years after our Constitution went into effect, Thomas Jefferson said, "I wish it were possible to obtain a single amendment to our Constitution. I would be willing to depend on that alone for the reduction of the administration of our government. I mean an additional article taking from the federal government the power of borrowing." This is indeed what a balanced budget amendment is all about, as Jeb Hensarling said, cutting up the credit cards. The American people understand this. 49 out of 50 states are required to do this. They see it done in their state year after year. They expect us to do it here in Washington. It's time we enshrined it in our Constitution.
Hi, Vern Buchanan from Florida. Everybody has a different reason why they run for Congress. My first week here in '07, I filed a constitutional balanced budget amendment. At that time, roughly, in the last 50 years, we've only balanced the budget 5 times or 6 times. 45 years, we haven't. Since I've been here, the Democrats had introduced PAYGO. I voted with them because I was hopeful maybe that was a possibility. Then we had the Debt Commission as a possibility. I just don't believe it gets done in this environment. It hasn't for 50 years. And as Bob mentioned, 49 out of 50 governors have to balance the budget. The state of Florida, looking at their revenues, they've lost $3 to $4 billion the last 3 or 4 years. They've made the tough choices. We are incapable of doing that without a constitutional balanced budget amendment, and I applaud the leadership for their leadership on this issue. Thank you.
Mike Hoffman from the state of Colorado. As a former state treasurer who's had to work within a balanced budget amendment, where we've had to make the difficult decisions and had the tough debates, those decisions and those debates that we don't have today here in the Congress of the United States because we don't have the discipline of the requirement for a balanced budget. And I think that the only way to do it is to have it in our Constitution. As it was said before, in 1995, the constitutional amendment to a balanced budget passed the House with a necessary 2/3 vote and failed in the Senate by 1 vote. As the chairman of the Balanced Budget Amendment Caucus in the House, with 70 members dedicated to taking a leadership role on the floor to push this forward, I look forward to this fight. I look forward to this debate.
Joe Walsh from Illinois. I am only a freshman, and the gentleman and the lady behind me have been advocating this cause for much longer than I have. But as a freshman, I, like most of my colleagues, came here, as Leader Cantor said, to structurally change the way this town does business. And we have an opportunity, a wonderful opportunity right now to do that by not just accepting cuts, but by forcing this town to balance their books every year by structurally amending the Constitution with the Balanced Budget Amendment. And I think it would be wonderful if we all could take advantage of this moment.
Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Cantor? Mr. Cantor, Harry Reid said today that you shouldn't be at the negotiating table. Some of your colleagues, albeit privately, have said that you being there in these meetings, your presence, is undercutting Speaker Boehner and undercutting Mitch McConnell. Are you the reason why there cannot be a deficit debt limit extension in the next few days?
You know, I guess I should turn to the Speaker and have him comment. You know, the Speaker and I have consistently been on the same page, and it's just as he laid out in terms of the principles that we are operating under, that our conference is fully behind, that we're not going to raise the debt ceiling if we don't have cuts in excess of that amount, that we don't want to raise taxes, and that we want to structurally change the system so that we stop this from happening again. And Leader Reid is, I imagine, frustrated as we all are. And the fact is, we are going to abide by our principles. And that's how it is, and I'm sure the Speaker joins me in that.
Let me just say, we have been in this fight together. And any suggestion that the role that Eric has played in this meeting has been anything less than helpful is just wrong. Listen, we're in the foxhole. And I'm going to tell you what, this is not easy. Because what we're trying to do here is to solve a problem that has eluded Washington for decades. I'm glad Eric's there. And those who have other opinions, they can keep them to themselves.
Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker? My turn.
Mr. Speaker?
Yes, vote.
Sir, if the balanced budget amendment were in effect, would your House-passed budget be in compliance at any point in the next 10 years?
I don't know. You have to ask Mr. Ryan the answer to that question.
Mr. Speaker, what do you think of Mitch McConnell?
We would have started at the same place.
Yes or no?
We would not have started at the same place. We have to move it.
What do you believe? What do you think of Mitch McConnell's proposal?
Mitch described his proposal as a last-ditch effort in case we're unable to do anything else. And what may look like something less than optimal today, if we're unable to get to an agreement, might look pretty good a couple of weeks from now. But I think it's worth keeping on the table. There are a lot of options that people have floated, and frankly, I think it's an option that may be worthy at some point.
Leader Cantor, do you regret saying things like there's no deal that can pass? Do you feel like that throws an obstacle in the way of reaching a deal?
You know, we've always participated, and I've been in the Biden discussions for almost 7 weeks prior to the point at which they stopped. It's almost 9 weeks total now that we've been talking about this. And the way that I have approached what it is the Speaker asked me to do in those talks, and the same thing that I've done as I've accompanied the Speaker of the White House, is try and see what can match up with the principles the Speaker has laid out, those 3 principles, and to garner the necessary support so that we can avoid going past August 2nd without increasing the debt limit. There is a dose of pragmatism in all that we do, and that is how are we going to achieve results so that we can deliver for the American people.
Mr. Speaker, when you say that nothing can pass, that ensures that nothing can pass.
Well, as I had said before, in the proposals that are on the table, given their current state, and what I know about where our members are in consultation with the whip, we are not yet at 218. And certainly I approach it, as has the Speaker said publicly, we want to make sure that we avoid default. We want to make sure that we avoid going past August 2nd without raising the debt ceiling.
Mr. Speaker.
If you and Mr. Cantor continue to say that raising taxes is bad for the economy and the economy will suffer, but Ben Bernanke painted a pretty dire picture today, saying that if you don't reach a deal, it could throw the financial system into chaos. Isn't default worse than raising taxes at this juncture?
No one wants to see the federal government walk away from our obligations. But at the same time, we've got to do something about the underlying problem, and that is spending. Spending that is out of control. And the President and the administration, our Democrat colleagues, still are not serious about cutting spending. That is the issue. We don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem.
Mr. Scenario sort of option, could the McConnell plan pass the House?
I have no idea.
Mr. Whip.
I think 57 Republicans sent a letter to Obama today asking him to just say, we don't have to default, we can pay our interest, we can pay Social Security, and pay the military. What do you think about that letter and the President coming out saying those things, or the House passing some of the pending legislation that does that?
It's pretty clear to me that there's going to be some discretion about who gets paid and who doesn't if we reach this point. Remember, we do not want to reach this point. There is no reason for this debate and this discussion to go past August the 2nd. All it takes is a little courage to actually cut spending and put America on a path of fiscal sanity.
Mr. Speaker, on the balanced budget amendment, Mr. McCarthy notes the lack of one vote in 97, but in the 4 years after that, there were surpluses. So why is there a need for a balanced budget amendment when the budget was balanced by 4 straight years?
To make sure it never happens again. Look what's happened over the last 10 years. Listen, a balanced budget amendment is in the Constitution of 49 of the 50 states. And trust me, it's not by accident. And having a balanced budget amendment as part of the U.S. Constitution would make sure that this problem never, ever happens again. Last question.
What has the President said to you when you told him about the balanced budget amendment? Has he reacted at all favorably, or has he completely opposed it?
I don't recall what his reaction was, but I did make clear to the President that if we're serious about putting spending controls in place, there is no better restraint than a balanced budget amendment.
Are you
Thanks.
writing off Democratic support for any deal?
Why are you going to Camp David?
Andrews Air Force Base?
Republican leadership from within the hour. Leader Pelosi also held her briefing earlier today, and you can find that online in our video library at cspan.org. Back on the House floor, this is the first amendment vote, the first of 9 amendment votes to the 2012 Energy and Water Spending Bill. This is Jim Matheson of California. His amendment would increase funding for non-defense environmental cleanup by $10 million. And the remaining 8 amendments will get 2-minute votes. So this first one just about wrapped up. Over in the Senate, they continue on procedural debate ahead of their consideration of their first 2012 spending bill, the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Bill, which the House dealt with several weeks ago. Also today on Capitol Hill, we covered a couple of economic hearings, first with the Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke, second day of testimony from the Fed chair on the semi-annual monetary policy report. And there again, also you can find that on our website, and we'll show it to you later in our program schedule. We also heard today from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau advisor, Elizabeth Warren. She was testifying before the House Oversight Committee. That too later in our schedule, and it's online at cspan.org.
On this vote, the yeas are 168 and the nays are 257. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for recorded vote on amendment offered by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Reed, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the nays prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Reed of New York.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of a request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. The members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Tom Reed's amendment would increase funding in the energy and water spending bill by $41 million for non-defense related environmental cleanup.
On this vote, the yeas are 261, the nays are 162. The amendment is agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 65, printed in the congressional record, offered by the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Holt, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the nays prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 65, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Holt of New Jersey.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
Rush Holt, Democrat of New Jersey, has an amendment which would increase the funding for the Energy Department's general science account by $43 million. The bill itself, nearly $31 billion for energy and water spending in 2012, in particular for the Energy Department, the Army Corps of Engineers, the Interior Department's Bureau of Reclamation, and a number of regional water and power agencies. Again, this is a series of 9 amendment votes. There are 6 more after this.
The yeas are 164, the nays are 261. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 68, printed in the congressional record and offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. Royce, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the noes prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 68, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Royce of California.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Well, Democrat Rush Holt's amendment to increase the funding in the general science account by $43 million fell short. Here is an amendment by Ed Royce of California, Republican, to reduce the funding in the science account by $10 million. Again, another 2-minute vote, and we expect this to be the last series of recorded votes in the House today. It is not likely that they'll finish work on the energy and water bills, so back tomorrow, and they're expected back in tomorrow morning as well, I believe at 9 o'clock Eastern. The U.S. Senate, meanwhile, is still working to move forward with their first their first consideration of a 2012 spending bill, the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs spending bill, with a series of procedural votes set in the Senate at around 4 o'clock Eastern. Debate continues, and you can follow that on C-SPAN 2.
This vote, the yeas are 136, the nays are 291. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 43, printed in the congressional record and offered by the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Brown, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 43, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
Republican of Georgia Paul Brown has an amendment reducing funding to the Energy Department's General Science account by $820 million. Just a couple more amendment votes to go, and then more amendment debate. In describing the earlier debate on the House floor on the 2012 Energy and Water Bill, Peter Kasperwitz of The Hill writes that language in the bill that moves $1 billion from a high-speed rail fund to an account for river and coastal flooding repairs prompted a nearly 2-hour East Coast versus Midwest feud in the House on Thursday. And he writes that when the House resumed consideration, several Democrats from the Northeast Corridor took to the floor to protest the transfer of funds. They argued that taking away the high-speed rail funding would stunt job creation in areas that need improved rail service. Just a reminder, too, if you miss any early House or Senate debate, you can always find it online in our Congressional Chronicle at cspan.org/Congress.
On this vote, the yeas are 99, the nays are 327. The amendment is...
Mr. Towns. Mr. Towns votes no.
I stand corrected. On this vote, the yeas are 99, the nays are 328. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on an amendment offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, on which the further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Schiff of California.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. The members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
The bill is H.R. 2354. It's the 2012 Energy and Water Spending Bill. It's the 5th spending bill that the House has considered, 5 of 12. And it is nearly $31 billion for the Energy Department, Army Corps of Engineers, and other agencies. It also includes $1 billion in emergency aid to areas near the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, the areas which obviously have seen a lot of flooding this year. This amendment by Adam Schiff, Democrat of California, would increase funding in the bill for the Advanced Research Energy Projects Agency by $80 million.
The yeas are 214, the nays are 213. The amendment is agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 48, printed in the congressional record and offered by the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Brown, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 48, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. The members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
This amendment by Paul Brown of Georgia would eliminate funding provided for the Advanced Technology Vehicle